Watch this vidcast, or I'll gouge your eyes out.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to the Ghostman and Rivera Horror Show podcast, our post-Halloween episode.
Yep, I'm Mike, sad Ghostman Pickle, because it's post-Halloween.
And I'm James Rivera. We have a lot to discuss, so we're going to get started with...
Horror show news.
The Spawn reboot is moving forward.
Robert Eggers' short, The Telltale Heart, is coming soon.
Edgar Wright's latest horror film, Last Night in Soho, to be set in the 1960s.
And Hulu is turning Clive Barker's Books of Blood into a movie.
So we've been reporting on the Spawn reboot for a while now. It's been touch and go with this project. When we first talked about it on the podcast last year, it was announced that Blumhouse would be financing it. Then we got the recent update that Todd McFarlane is not getting the budget that he wanted, so he wouldn't be moving forward with it. But now, it looks like it's going to be moving forward. This is what Todd McFarlane had to say. We keep pushing for it. It's interesting because the Marvel movies, the MCU, has been doing quite well, and those are PG-13 movies. I keep trying to convince people that doing a dark, serious comic book movie will work. There's been so much success with these PG-13 movies that there's a resistance to them in Hollywood. But since Joker came out, it proves that what I've been saying for over 2 years to any executives I can talk to you. Serious dark comic books can work. R-rated movies succeed. So now all of a sudden, I have been getting a lot of phone calls saying, Todd, we need to talk to you about that R-rated dark thing you wanted to do. So Joker did me a favor. This has been in production at Blumhouse. They couldn't agree on a budget. Now it looks like the offers are starting to pour in. And I'm not surprised, given the success of Joker.
But they weren't convinced with Logan or Deadpool.
Deadpool's a little bit more funny. It's more lighthearted.
Yeah.
Logan, while it's serious, I don't know if it's as dark as Joker or Spawn. So I think it's not necessarily the R-rated thing. I think it's the dark R-rated thing that turns studios off. The idea that it might seem unfriendly to audiences. I've been hearing about this in 6th grade. I'm finally glad. I'm hoping this is serious now. Moving forward,
just when we got to the point where we're tired of hearing about it, say, okay, we're going to do it now.
That's how Hollywood works. They need to see a precedent being set, and they need to see it be successful before they're comfortable moving in on anything.
Yeah, so they don't want to set the precedent; they just want to ride it.
No.
All right, we got Robert Eggers' short, The Telltale Heart, is coming. So, because before The Witch, Eggers did a few short films actually, and one of them was The Telltale Heart, based on the work of Edgar Allan Poe. He revealed during a Reddit session that it will be available before the end of the year. The synopsis is: within the chambers of a desolate house, a solitary servant tends to his invalid master. Tangibly detailed period design and the hauntingly lifelike puppetry unearth the dream world of Poe. This short film, Brothers, is available through Vimeo.
I'm excited to check this out because I'll be reviewing The Lighthouse later on the podcast. Robert Eggers seems to thrive in old world settings in the past, so it would make sense that he would do an Edgar Allan Poe adaptation. It seems right up his alley as far as his style goes. He said that this one isn't perfect, but he's excited to get it out to the world. He says there's only a few good parts about it. I have a feeling he's just being modest or not trying to brag when he says that.
Yeah, or he realizes how far he's come. And
regardless, I'm still looking forward to, because we've seen Ari Aster's short, The Strange Thing About the Johnsons.
Yes.
And while his 2 feature-length films are obviously better, you could see the talent that was already there, and you could see the style set in. So I'm hoping for something similar from this one. I'm going to have to check out Brothers. That's available on Vimeo right now. So if anybody loved The Lighthouse and you need more of a Robert Eggers fix, you could check that out. This one will be coming out, The Telltale Heart will be coming out later this year. Edgar Wright's latest horror film, The Last Night in Soho, to be set in the 60s. It's being described as a psychological horror movie that's going to star Anna Taylor-Joy and Thomasin McKenzie. Empire Magazine recently released a preview of upcoming 2020 movies. In the description it said, much of Wright's movies takes place in the London of the swinging 60s, a time period with which his lead character, Thomasin McKenzie's Eloise, is obsessed, and through a mysterious connection with Taylor-Joy's character Sandy, gets to experience. Edgar Wright also said, "There's something I have in common with the lead character in that I am afflicted with nostalgia for a decade I didn't live in. You think about 60s London, what would that be like? and the reality of the decade is maybe not what she imagines. It has an element of be careful what you wish for. Edgar Wright co-wrote the script with Christy Wilson Kames of Penny Dreadful, and it's set to be released September 25th, 2020, so it's almost a year out before we're going to get to see this.
It sounds very interesting, though. I can't wait for that one.
It's been a while since Edgar Wright has tackled the horror genre. Probably since Actually, he hasn't done anything horror since Shaun of the Dead, has he?
Yeah, his last one was Baby Driver.
Even without all of his horror films, I'm a big fan of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I really enjoyed Baby Driver.
Yeah.
Shaun of the Dead, of course, has aged into a classic, as we know.
Yeah.
And it seems like he's going for a completely new type of horror film. He's not going back to the well. It's not another zombie movie. This seems to... I don't even know what he's aspiring to. I'm guessing this is not a horror comedy.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not another comedy either.
I like the idea of setting in the 60s. It's always good to see a good period piece.
Yeah. He raised the bar of quality with Baby Driver.
Yes.
So if he's going to do a horror film in that type of quality, I can't wait to see that shit.
Edgar Wright, one of our most talented filmmakers working today.
He certainly is. And another talented person working in horror today is the great Clive Barker. And his Books of Blood is turning into a feature film. And he's doing it with Brandon Braga and Seth MacFarlane. This is from Bloody Disgusting. It's written by Braga and Adam Simon, who wrote Salem and The Haunting in Connecticut. And it's based on a short story by Barker with contributing original material. So I'm very excited about. Books of Blood takes a journey into uncharted and forbidden territory through three tales tangled in space and time. Anna Friel plays Marcella, and she'll star alongside Britt Robertson from For the People, and Rafi Gavron from A Star is Born, and Yul Vasquez from Midnight, Texas. Friel will play a brilliant, beautiful psychologist who has gained fame as a skeptic that debunks all theories or beliefs that are not solely scientifically based. She loses her 7-year-old son to leukemia and then meets Simon, played by Gavron, who becomes her lover and convinces her that he speaks for her dead child.
This is really interesting to me because, in the week since our last podcast, Mike and I have been taking a break from both our television series that we've been working on, and I started reading Clive Barker's Books of Blood again recently. Now, that story was actually already adapted into a movie in 2009. I've never seen it. I find this very fascinating because I just finished reading the story. It's like an 8-page long story. They're going to have to balloon a lot of it up. I like the idea of the anthology angle because I want to see more of Clive Barker's stories adapted. However, I'm not sure how I feel about him contributing original material. I actually kind of like the idea of Clive Barker contributing original material, but the Books of Blood are so filled with so many great stories that deserve to be adapted. This is a little bit different from the book. In the book, there is a psychologist, Mary, who goes around trying to debunk theories, but she has a man named Simon who claims that he could read for the dead, and I'm not going to spoil the twist, but the whole angle with the leukemia and the dead child and the idea that she's a famous skeptic seems like a way to balloon the story out a little bit more. We'll see how it turns out. I actually think the Books of Blood would be perfect for a television series. But then again, I could be wrong. It is Clive Barker. He's a fucking brilliant... He's a genius. A genius, so...
This story is meant to be an intro to the Books of Blood, though, right?
Correct. Even though that it's just an intro and they're going to be puffing it out with different stories, I could already tell that they had to expand it more than what it was. The way that the story reads, it revolves around an event happening in a haunted place, in a haunted building, but it mostly revolves around one event. Most of the time, reading the story is taking up with the descriptions and the feeling of what's going on while a supernatural occurrence is happening. It puts you in the head state of what it would be like to be there. But as a piece of literature, you could draw that out to 8 pages. In a movie, you're going to have to create a whole other story beyond just one event, and it looks like they're doing just that. I hope they do a good job. I haven't seen The Orville. Seth MacFarlane and Brandon Braga actually created the sci-fi series The Orville together, so it looks like this is another collaboration. I've heard good things about it. I know it's not the usual Seth MacFarlane project. It's supposed to be a little bit more serious, and it's somewhat of a tribute to Star Trek, from what I understand.
Yeah, I watched it thinking it was going to be like a live action Family Guy in space, since Seth MacFarlane was involved. But the little bit that I watched of it seemed like a serious sci-fi show with good effects and actually a decent script.
If not for that, I would think that it's a little bit odd that Seth MacFarlane is going to be one of the people who's going to be tackling a Clive Barker Books of Blood adaptation.
As long as Clive Barker is heavily involved,
I'm sure it's going to be good.
I have faith in it that it's going to be good, yeah.
This news came just as I started reading the Books of Blood. I read them years ago as a teenager, and they were my favorite piece of horror literature in general. Is just Clive Barker's all 6 volumes of his Books of Blood.
Yeah,
it is beautifully written. It's so imaginative, and it goes far and beyond anything that even Stephen King has ever written. His writing reminds me a little bit of an Edgar Allan Poe. The prose is extremely poetic, and it's worded in a way that really puts you into the experience of where you're at or where you're supposed to be. I haven't been reading for a few years because I've just been busy trying to get the show going, working on the podcast, and in my free time, I'm more likely to watch movies because reading is a mental exercise. But starting to read Clive Barker's Books of Blood again reminded me of what I was missing out on.
Shut up.
Why I should continue reading and why literature is such a great art form.
Yeah, because I've been making short films and stuff now for about 10 years. And in that time, I stopped reading narrative pieces of fiction myself, because everything I sat down to read, I felt like I needed to absorb information. I need to learn.
I've had the same attitude.
Yeah, but it's a bad attitude to have, because when you read fiction, you're still working on your craft. You're still honing your craft. That's what we need to realize,
And I feel like this makes you... I'm looking forward to going back into writing again, because I honestly feel that a lot of my writing, well, I still like it. It's gone down in quality, in my opinion, in the past few years. When I read things that I wrote a long time ago, I look at it and I'm like, I feel like I couldn't write something that good now, or I couldn't word it that well now. And I figured out the reason is because I stopped reading. I stopped taking in new vocabulary words. I stopped absorbing different turns of phrases, ways to word things. And I feel that keeping a steady diet of literature on hand, especially something as well written as Clive Barker's, because Clive Barker is respected beyond the world of horror. His literature goes beyond what Stephen King is. Stephen King is great, but he's kind of a bestseller, and he's somewhat looked down upon by a lot of the elitist snobs in the world of literature.
Yeah.
Clive Barker demands respect in that area just because his stuff is so well written. It reaches for deeper themes, and it's a bit more imaginative. He tends to get more respect in serious literary circles, even from people who don't like reading horror.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a good collection of short stories, I'd highly recommend reading Clive Barker's Books of Blood. Volumes 1 through 3 are available. It's like $15 on Amazon. You can just order it on Amazon, or you could visit your local Barnes and Nobles. 16 short stories, and they run the gamut as far as horror goes. Some of it is really gruesome and graphic. Some of it is supernatural. Some of it is psychological, and there's even a few that are flat out comedy. Clive Barker is just a little bit harder to adapt than somebody like Stephen King, because Clive Barker's work, a lot of the power of his literature comes from how it's written. It comes from the fact that it's a piece of literature and the way that he manipulates the English language to his will to get inside your head. And that's a little bit harder to translate cinematically. His stories are not as straightforward as Stephen King. Stephen King's imagination lends itself to film adaptations because of the types of stories he comes up with. But I would like to see some more of his work adapted, because, let's face it, not a whole lot of people read these days, and a lot of fans of the horror genre are more likely to watch movies or TV shows about horror.
I sadly haven't read any Clive Barker, but I plan on changing that. From the way you describe it to me, it sounds to me a little bit like Poppy Z. Bright is influenced by him, and I've read a lot of her. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like that with a little more fantastical element added to it.
Well, just imagine something like Hellraiser. Imagine that as a piece of literature. The descriptions of the Cenobites in detail conjures images that can't be replicated on screen, because he did a damn fucking good job of adapting that story, The Hellbound Heart. into a film and created these terrifying, iconic creations. But to read his work, to have him describe what these creatures look like, is even more horrifying, and it burrows further into your imagination than the films do.
Hi, I'm Elliot. You're listening to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
So we've been having a pretty crazy week with Halloween. We didn't get to do our Halloween episode this year, but this is our post-Halloween show. So we're going to talk about all the shenanigans we had during Halloween, Halloween time.
Michael, you did a lot, so let's hear what you did.
Mine started off on the 26th. Up until then, I was pulling my hair out. I didn't know what the hell I've had some financial problems lately. We had a big disaster with the show. We were supposed to air on the 25th in our regular time slot on Friday, and we did not air, and we didn't hear about what was going on for a while, but come to find out there was a big disaster at the American Horrors Film Festival in Geneva, Wisconsin. There was an actress there, had some problems. She went missing. There was a big surge in viewers on the channel, so the server went down.
It crashed.
It crashed. So it went from about 20,000 people a day to about 40,000 people per day.
Before you go on, just to let people know, our Halloween special did air on Halloween. It ended up being pushed to being played on Halloween, which is probably a more fitting date anyway.
I hope you guys watched the special. We're going to take a few weeks off to gear up for the end of the season.
Tune into Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show.
I'll tell you a little bit about the Rated R Speakeasy. It was different this time since it was a little special Halloween event. It was on the Santa Monica Pier, right in the Carousel House. So the Carousel just acted as a backdrop. A bunch of really cool horror movies playing outside on a big screen. There was a bar inside by the Carousel. It was out in the open air. It was near the ocean. So it was much cooler than the other Rated R Speakeasies, which were in a warehouse. The great director and fellow podcaster Joe Lynch was there. He hosted a costume contest, and we got to meet Joe Lynch, and he got a picture with my wife. There was a cool little Zoltar booth where it looked like those Zoltar booths where it's like a genie and it tells your fortune.
From what I understand, you attended an It musical parody.
Yeah, that was the next thing on the very next day. We were feeling a little frazzled from the night before from drinking and dancing half the night, and this was early in the day the next day. But boy, was it worth it to get up and make the effort, even though we were hungover. It was on October 27th. It was at the Rockwell Theater in LA. It was It the Musical, which was a live rendition of the It story, and it was based on the book and both movies. So it's kind of... Are you talking
about the miniseries in the movie, or both of the two recent movies?
The miniseries and both the recent movies and the book.
Okay, so it's more of a commentary on it as a pop culture phenomenon as opposed just to one strict adaptation.
Yeah, and in the lyrics and the dialogue, they make fun of certain things in the story. They make fun of things that are different from the book. But it was a live band playing the music. The singers and the performers, all the actors and everything, professional. It was great choreography, awesome set pieces. It's funny and interesting lyrics put to familiar songs, and the songs always fit the narrative. It got to the part where Pennywise was tempting Georgie from the sewer. He started singing "Come Sail Away with Me," and the Pennywise was fucking amazing. I gotta tell you this guy's name. And of course, if you play Pennywise,
you have a lot to live up to with Tim Curry and Skarsgård.
It's Garrett Clayton.
Who played Pennywise?
Yeah, he was not only a good actor, excellent singer. He had a huge range, and he would just belt it out. And all these singers are really good. And sometimes they would stand like next to you. They kind of spread across the whole room, and they kind of played the whole room where the stage was in the middle, but all the characters kind of spread out through the whole crowd, through the whole thing. So you never know when a character is going to be right next to you or running past you. So they each had wireless microphones by their mouths. They would stand so close to you could hear their voices in stereo, coming out of their mouths and coming out of the speakers too. So it was a really cool, immersive experience. And the ending, the finale, was better than any of the films. Honestly, one of the coolest live performances I ever seen, just because it's so close to my ultimate idea of entertainment. So if you guys get a chance to see it, I guess they do a lot of musical renditions of different movies and stuff. I think they got Edward Scissorhands coming up. So if you get a chance, look it up at the Rockwell Theater.
You're listening to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
The next thing I'd done was on October 30th, we drove to the Great Ventura. If you watch the show, you know how much I love Ventura, and we went exploring it with Susie from the show.
Susie Block.
And with my friend Newt. We went to Ventura, and then from Ventura, we checked into a haunted hotel there at the Bella Maggiore. And then we drove down to Thousand Oaks for Reign of Terror. And it's about I talked about this last year, it's about 115 rooms of just immersive horror experience. There was sections like the asylum, where it has a bunch of crazy people in it and padded walls. And then there was a military complex thing you entered, and there was infected zombies everywhere. And then you enter a fun house where there's killer clowns everywhere. And then you enter the backwoods where it's woods everywhere, and there's deformed rednecks and stuff coming after you. It's just very effective. And they added something this year, The Nun, where you walk around the corner, and at the end of this hallway, it's that picture of the nun. And they seem to know that everybody's going to turn and kind of focus their attention on it, because it kind of drops, and then an animatronic nun comes out in your face screaming and shaking its head. So that already scares you. And then that drops and a real person pops out. So they give you a double scare, and there's a lot of those throughout every one of those 115 rooms. And man, was it entertaining. So right after Reign of Terror, we headed back to Ventura and stayed the night in the Bella Maggiore. And my wife knocked out about, I believe it was about 11 or 12. And just after 12, I went roaming the hotel, and there's this sun deck thing. And just inside the sun deck, there's a few sitting spaces right there where you can sit down and read a book or whatever. I went there by myself and kind of sat there looking through this picture book of Ventura. And I got a cold spot that kind of seemed like it sat down right next to me. So I have that on video. So I'm going to go through and see if I can find anything on that video. I looked through it once on my phone. The only thing weird about it, I kind of turned it around and faced it towards me, and I was pointing it toward where the cold spot was, and I kept running my hands through it. Right in front of me, the air was warm. I'd move it to the side, I'd feel the cold, I'd pass my hand through it, and I'd feel the warm on the other side. But we snuck up to the haunted city hall, where a ghost judge has been seen walking around, and also a floating head up on the 3rd floor. And it's so haunted, they have sealed the 3rd floor, and they won't let anybody up there. I tried to get up there once before, and they told me that normally when people come asking to look up there, they let them do it. But anytime around Halloween, they refuse to go up there, and they refuse to let anybody up there because they're afraid of what will happen. This is people working at City Hall. Anyway, I went ahead and snuck up to the 3rd floor. So that's another place that I videotaped and took pictures. So I'll be analyzing that, but it was really creepy up there. But anyway, that was a nice, fun trip to Haunted Ventura. It was my 20th wedding anniversary as well on Halloween. So that's how I spent that. So then on the 31st, we came back to Whittier. So we ended up walking around here in Whittier. And we went up to the historic district, where there's a bunch of old houses, like 100, 200-year-old houses. And that was many more trick-or-treaters than I imagined. I don't know if there was more trick-or-treaters out this year than usual, or if I picked the right spot. But what we did was just some dorks, me and my wife and our friend Yayi. We all just put on costumes. I put on my ghoul costume from the short extended scare package. I put on my ghoul costume, and my wife was dressed like a dinosaur, and Yayi didn't dress up. But me and my wife were just goofballs walking around Whittier scaring people. My highlight of the night was scaring 6 kids. There's 6 separate kids that were visibly scared when they see me. Mm-hmm. And then a couple more, they were excited. They were like, oh, that guy's scary. Mm-hmm. So that was pretty cool. And then we came back to the house and drank some whiskey and watched Trick or Treat and knocked out.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
I'm not going to go into too much detail on my Halloween, because it's not everything is something I want to share on the podcast. Mm. I did do shrooms and watched the 3rd Nightmare on Elm Street Dream Warriors which was a pretty unique and fun experience.
That sounds like about what I felt like being immersed in a horror experience. You're probably kind of immersed in it too.
Yes, I was, and especially the dream sequences were extra immersive under the influence of psychedelics. That's all I'm going to say about it. But if you know what psychedelics are like, just try to imagine it with Dream Warriors, and I'm pretty sure you'd get a pretty weird experience.
I've done shrooms before, and I cannot imagine watching a horror film on shrooms. I've only watched Nice Things before. I briefly watched Natural Born Killers one time on shrooms, and I started freaking out, and I had to turn it off.
I picked that one because it's a fun horror movie that has good horror elements that's not too scary. I wouldn't put the first Nightmare on Elm Street on, or something like Wes Craven's New Nightmare, or something like that. I probably would not have felt comfortable putting on, but I felt like this is a good little compromise. It's still a horror movie. It's not too hardcore, but it's weird and imaginative enough that shrooms will make it weirder.
The kills weren't traumatizing, though?
No, they were kind of funny.
I'll have to try it. It seems like they'd be traumatizing to me.
They were a little bit funnier. Anyways, I wanted to get to talking about The Lighthouse.
Oh, yeah, I didn't get to see that. Doing so much stuff around the holidays and then the financial woes.
Yes, so Michael didn't get to see it, but I'm going to go over it right now, review it.
But I promise to watch it by next week, and we'll
have another discussion of it. So, The Lighthouse is directed by the great Robert Eggers, who did my favorite horror film of the decade, The Witch.
Gosh.
And I've had time to let this movie digest now, and I think we have a new classic on our hands. It's a masterpiece. One of the best movies of the year, certainly the best looking movie of the year, extremely stylized in a way that pushes beyond what The Witch did. It reminds me a little bit of David Lynch, but it doesn't feel like it's copying David Lynch. It reminds me a little bit of The Twilight Zone, but not quite that. A lot of memorable imagery, and it's a movie that's hard to spoil. It just revolves around two lighthouse keepers, one played by Willem Dafoe, who oversees the whole operation, and his underling played by Robert Pattinson. And man, these are the only two actors that you get in the entire movie, other than a mermaid-like creature who appears in what is either hallucinations or hauntings. It's not very clear as to what it is. So there's a mermaid character who appears, but other than that, it's just Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe. Fuck. Those were some intense fucking performances. I don't think either of them has ever been better on film. Willem Dafoe, since he's the one who oversees the whole thing and he gets to boss Robert Pattinson's character around, he is a fucking asshole, but he is hilarious to watch. There are so many speeches. Robert Eggers stuffs their mouths with speeches, and I'll be honest, I didn't understand everything that they were saying just because they're speaking in a style of language that's kind of outdated and nobody uses anymore.
Oh, again.
Somewhat like The Witch. So there's a big fidelity to the language, to trying to preserve how people would have spoken back then. However, I understood enough to understand it. Even if you don't get things in here, if you might miss a few things here and there, you should be able to get enough to just understand what was going on. But man, Willem Dafoe steals the movie, and you think that it's just Willem Dafoe's movie because he does nothing but ride Robert Pattinson the whole way through. He's an asshole, he's frustrating, but he's hilarious at the same time. You find yourself getting a little maddened by him, but every time he drives you mad, you start laughing. And Willem Dafoe's performance for a long period of the movie serves as more of like a calmer performance, something that's an anchor, somebody that's there to weather the abuse that Willem Dafoe meets out over the course of the first half of the movie. But it gets to a certain point where both characters have been stuck in this lighthouse for a long time. As you can imagine, cabin fever starts to set in, and before you know it, Robert Pattinson just decides that he's had enough of Willem Dafoe's constant ranting and raving, and he spits out a fucking venomous speech at him and you get to see Robert Pattinson's performance start to rise to the level of Willem Dafoe's, and from the end of by the end, it's just a battle of wits between the two. There's a lot more going on than that. I'm still not clear what was going on because it's a movie that blurs the lines between reality, fantasy, and the supernatural. I get the feeling that there's a lot of supernatural occurrences in the movie. I get the feeling that some of them are only in the heads of the characters, but some of them seem like they're very real. Some of the imagery is very ethereal, very strange, very striking. Well, the first time you watch it, you're definitely going to leave a little puzzled and not surely full what to think of it, but it's riveting the entire runtime, the whole way through. It's just absolutely powerful filmmaking. It has elements of The Shining in it. It's a lot different from The Witch. I could somewhat tell that these come from the same minds, but it's pushed in a much further, more surreal direction. Overall, I think The Witch is probably a better horror film than The Lighthouse, but I hesitate to call it a better film than The Lighthouse, if that makes sense. Because they're both definitely horror films, but The Witch leans a little bit more into announcing itself as a horror movie, whereas The Lighthouse is a little bit more inscrutable and a little bit more deranged and a lot more surreal.
It still has a lot of horror elements, though.
Oh, yeah, it has a lot of horror elements, and it's just because it's so bewildering, it's hard not to be horrified by what you're seeing on the screen.
Yeah.
And a lot of the best horror elements are things that I can't ruin on the podcast anyway, because they're mostly visual, and I can't really describe what it is that I'm looking at sometimes. But there's some very striking visual imagery in there where it seems like it's fantasy imagery bleeding into reality, bleeding in and out of reality. Very unique, very original. I'm still processing it, to be honest, even now that I've only seen it once and I've had a little time to mule it over. I have the feeling that the more I revisit this film over time, the better it's going to get each time I watch it. I highly recommend that you go check out The Lighthouse. However, beware, this is for very adventurous film goers. This is for adventurous horror movie lovers. If you like your stuff too cookie cutter, this is going to piss you off. And if you expect neat, tidy resolutions and a straight, clean, forward narrative, this is not the movie for you. This is a movie that you go to surrender yourself to the artist's vision, to surrender yourself to the madness that is unfolding on screen, and you get caught up in it like a fever dream. That's the best way I could describe it. You get caught up on screen. Once it's over, you're not sure what happened, but you know something really hit you very hard. It's kind of like a jarring nightmare that you wake up from, that you try to make sense out of. You can't quite make sense out of what was happening, but the emotions that you felt during it are very clear to you. They stay embedded in your brain.
Yep. Well, anything that's two characters, one location is going to be kind of maddening.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a certain skill to keep your interest.
Not only a certain skill, you have to have, if you're going to rely only on two actors, they better be damn fucking good actors if you want to just confine it to two actors. And man, these two fucking really rise to meet the occasion. And if you're one of those people who's doubtful of Robert Pattinson's acting abilities and are skeptical of his casting as Batman, this might be a movie to see to quell your nerves with regards to him being cast as the new Batman.
This one and Good Time.
Yes, this one and Good Time. I can't wait to talk about it more on this podcast once you've seen it, Michael. I feel it's something, it's unique, it's really special. I don't even know where I would rank it on my horror movies of the year or even my movies of the year list as far as right now, but it's definitely going to be up there on both lists. I'm just not sure where.
Well, it's not playing in enough theaters, I can tell you that much.
It's playing wider than a lot of movies that go into limited release, so I'll give it that, but it should be playing a little bit wider.
Yeah, because it's not playing in my local theater. It wasn't playing at the theater in Ventura. It seemed like only AMC's were playing it.
Edwards are playing it too now.
Oh, Edwards is too?
Yeah,
Okay,
Edwards
cool.
is starting to play it now. So it's slowly expanding. If you're in the US, if you're in the UK or overseas, I actually think that the release date is not until next year. So if that's your case, I'm terribly sorry that you have to wait so long to see this absolute gem of a film.
So theater owners, put more shit like this in your theaters.
Oh, and this is a movie that demands a big screen experience because there's since it takes place on a lighthouse, I forgot what's that sound that goes off. It's like a foghorn.
Oh yeah.
There's this really deep foghorn that if you see it in a theater where the settings are absolutely right, you feel like you're inside the lighthouse. The sound design is so immersive, and the foghorn goes off every few minutes in the movie, and you could feel it whooshing over your body from front to back, like you are actually inside the lighthouse and hearing it from that vantage point and that perspective. I got to see it in an ArcLight movie theater, which is top notch as far as their presentation and the sound quality goes. And man, that's the way to see this movie. Try to see this in a good fucking movie theater. Don't see this even in a rink-a-dink theater. See this in a good movie theater, because its sound is integral to the impact it's going to have on you.
You're listening to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I watched yet another great 2019 horror film, Eli, on Netflix. I've seen quite a few people talking about this. Some people were calling it a masterpiece that scared the shit out of them. Some people were calling it a piece of shit. So I had to see it.
It's divisive, so that's always a good sign for me.
Yeah. And it was a very good sign on this one, because boy did it deliver. It's directed by Claren Foy. He directed The Citadel in 2012, which was really good, and Sinister 2 in 2015, which wasn't as good, but I'm thinking that might be the studio's fault. But its writers are David Chirchilio, and he wrote Cheap Thrills, which I haven't seen, but I've heard very good things about. And the other writers were Ian Goldberg and Richard Nailing, who wrote Autopsy of Jane Doe, which was another awesome modern horror film. It stars Charlie Shotwell, who is Eli, the little boy. He was in Captain Fantastic, and he's in Jennifer Kent's Nightingale. And Kelly Riley, who was in Eden Lake, plays the mom. And the doctor is played by Lily Taylor, who is becoming quite a figure in the horror community with The Conjuring and Leatherface and Hemlock Grove. And she started out in horror in The Haunting a while back, the cheesy CGI-laden remake to Haunting of Hill House a few years ago. This one opens with a dream sequence from Eli, and you can realize right away, holy shit, this kid can act. He's got this autoimmune disease that's so bad he has to have a hazmat suit to leave his house. So he's a really sick little boy, and he starts seeing these ghosts all around him that are stalking him. And his parents take him to this doctor, Lily Taylor, who insists that she can cure him, but the treatments that she gives him become more and more deadly. The story is very emotional, very serious, but something feels off about it in a good way. It's all very subtle hints that something is off. Everything on the surface seems like this facility is trying to help him, but then the treatments on this little boy get more and more horrific, and then you think, are they really getting more horrific? Is it in this little boy's mind? What's going on? Is he really seeing these ghosts? So you kind of question the boy's sanity. There's these little subtle touches, like the nurses are mean to him for some reason. Like it's like this innocent little boy going through these torturous procedures, and then these nurses are mean to him, but he's a smart little boy and he handles them pretty well. The ghosts that taunt him is very creepy and subtle taunting, and it gets more and more strange and more frightening. And then there's this strange little girl shows up, and you're not sure if she's a figment of his imagination. She's the only one that believes him that these people are sinister and they're trying to do something horrible to him. And then there's a really interesting dynamic that happens when the boy at the beginning of it, when he starts having his allergic reactions to air, to water, or anything. The parents have these calming techniques that they use to calm him down. And then the more maddening it gets, and the more this boy's going crazy because nobody believes him, the more maddening those parent calming techniques become. So something that was so sweet and endearing in the beginning, these parents connecting with their kid, trying to get him to calm down, become like really annoying and maddening to the little kid. And holy shit, it leads up to an awesome ending. I won't say anything about this ending, but it kind of turns everything you just saw on its head, and everything's explained. All the little strange things throughout are explained to you, and it's a very it's a frightening climax. It's a fun climax. They did some things where I wasn't quite sure how they did it. Very impressive. I loved it all the way through. It's another great 2019 horror film, and it's making it harder and harder to make my list for the end of the year.
So that's a Netflix original, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So
Netflix does it again.
Shut your mouth, or I'll rip your lips off.
I watched another movie. It's a German film that came out in Germany in 2017, traveled the festival circuit in 2018, but wasn't released here in the US until earlier this year, around April, in a limited run. It's called Haguzussa, A Heathen's Curse. I actually saw this because I'm part of a lot of film groups on social media, and I saw somebody post something about this movie. They said if you enjoyed The Witch, Midsommar, Hereditary, this the new wave of art house horror movies, this is for you. And the person on this post actually said it blows those movies out of the water. I have to disagree. It doesn't blow those movies out of the water. I have quite a few problems with it, but overall, I think it's a work of a very talented, burgeoning director. This is a synopsis of the movie. The dark legend of the young woman Albrun and her struggles to preserve her own sanity, and tries to explore the fine line between ancient magic, faith, and madness at a time when pagan beliefs in witches and nature spirits spread fear and terror in the minds of the rural population. It starts off being about a mother and a daughter. They're both accused of being witches in this little village that they're in, and the village seems to be in the woods during in a very snowy area, and somewhere in Germany, I'm guessing. And it does have the feel of a folk tale, the way that The Witch does. It moves that the way The Witch does. It has the same feeling. A lot of the filmmaking is very measured, very eerie in the way that it slowly burrows its way inside of your head, and it's a very slow burn movie. And that would be my major complaint with it. While I do love a slow burn, and I've never understood people's impatience with movies like The Witch and Hereditary, this is one where it goes for the same thing, but it's a little bit stately for a little too long, where a couple of times where I'm like, this is good, this is quality, but I think we need to pick it up here, or pick up the pace, or like move this along a little bit faster. But as it goes along, it gets better and better. It just takes a little while to get there. The acting in it is really good, but what really gets me about the movie is mostly the imagery, the camera work, the atmosphere, the vibe, and the general feeling of evil that kind of hovers throughout the entire film. There's a lot of strange sounds in this movie. It has an excellent sound design, and it has a very twisted ending. I'm not going to ruin what it is. It gets better as it goes along. So overall, I enjoyed it, and I think if you enjoy films like The Witch and Hereditary, it's worth seeking out. However, even by those standards of those films, it probably takes a little bit too long to get going and could have been paced a little bit better. So if it were my film, there were some tweaks. I would have tweaked and nudged it a little bit in the editing process. However, it's not my film, and it's not my place to tell an artist how to make their own film. And as it is, it's a very good, very artistic horror film that could have been better with some stronger pacing. But overall, worth the recommendation, especially if you're a little bit more patient with your horror films and you like the atmosphere and dread to build into it. Yes, it's available in the US on Amazon Prime. Outside of the States, I wouldn't know how to watch it.
For my next movie, real quick, I'm going to do something that I never normally do. I watched a movie that I don't care about discussing. It's The Silence on Netflix, because the last movie reminded me of it. I didn't even add it to my stuff to discuss this week. It's the one with Stanley Tucci and Kiernan Shipka.
I've heard of this one.
It's a waste of those two. It's everything that I was afraid it was going to be. It's forgettable. The story, I know the story, it's based on a novel, so I know it's not derivative of Bird Box, but they sure made it derivative. They sure made it come off as derivative. It was forgettable. It was dumb. There was long periods of nothing. I don't like it.
It's The Silence?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to say about that one before I move on to my next one.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah. It's so forgettable, I'm not going to discuss it. Screw that movie. The next movie I watched during the little Halloween week was Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. I watched it with Joe Bob Briggs. It was part of his little Halloween hootenanny. And I wish I would have watched the original with Joe Bob instead of picking this one. Boy, did I realize how much I agree with my statement before after watching Halloween 2018. Halloween 2018 is the best sequel after it's the best sequel period. And it's the best movie of the franchise after
the original Halloween.
After the original Halloween, because Halloween 4 wasn't a complete piece of It had some good elements about it, but it was...
Bear in mind, it is a fan favorite. And
Yeah.
it has a similar reputation that A Nightmare on Elm Street Dream Warriors has amongst Freddy fans, Michael Myers fans. It has that sort of reputation. I'm not particularly a fan of it either,
Yeah.
but bear in mind, we apologize. We know these movies do have their cult audience.
Yeah, it's a really simplified, diluted story. It was directed by Dwight H. Little, who did The Phantom of the Opera with Robert Englund. He also did a movie that I love, Rapid Fire, with Brandon Lee.
Better than Halloween 4.
Yeah, better than that, yeah, that's for sure. And he did Anacondas, which I haven't seen. And it was written by, the story was done by 4 people. I have no idea why, because the story was really basic. And the writer was Alan B. McElroy, who did Rapid Fire, Spawn, the series, and Wrong Turn.
Oh yeah, I know who that is.
Yeah.
He did. Yeah, I know his work mostly from the Spawn animated series on HBO.
Yeah. But if you like Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis, you won't be disappointed here. He's
Hamming it up.
Yeah, hamming it up, batshit crazy as ever. Danielle Harris was really good in it. She was 11 years old at the time, and Joe Bob points out how creepy it is. How some people say, like some guys say that like she's their crush, and that's why they like watching Halloween 4.
Ugh.
She was 11. Okay?
That is fucking creepy.
I understand that she became your crush later, but
That doesn't mean you should be lusting over a little girl. Oh, that's fucking disgusting.
But this really cheesy guard comes in toward the beginning of the movie to explain the whole plot and catch everyone up. That was lame. And, of course, they're transferring Michael Myers to another facility, and he escapes, of course. And one of the cheesiest parts of it, I always thought the mask looked shitty, and I didn't remember why. And it's because he goes to a drugstore to stalk someone, and there's a Michael Myers mask on the... So it's not even a quality store. It's like a lame drugstore mask. He grabs it off the shelf, and that becomes his Michael Myers mask for the movie. So it's like them explaining.
So it's a rip-off of the Michael Myers mask in a fictional world where Michael Myers exists.
Yeah, and
that sounds like a lazy excuse to not put too much effort in making it a good mask.
And people say the Halloween 2018 was a lame excuse for him to get his mask back, but this was even worse, dude. Come on.
Yeah, but at least the Halloween 2018 actually looked like what a Michael Myers mask is supposed to look like.
Exactly. And the kills were awesome, brutal, and interesting in the 2018 one. And this one,
How were the kills? To be honest, I've seen Halloween 4 a few times, and the thing that most slips my memory about it, I don't remember any of the kill scenes. The only one I remember is the end where Jamie Lloyd sort of turns into Michael Myers, and it becomes an imitation of the first scene from Halloween, where you see it from her point of view, and she's dressed in the clown suit before stabbing somebody. Yeah. And apparently she has Michael Myers' soul or the curse, something. I don't know. I don't know what the hell it is.
It's almost like as it was transferred to her, and then Dr. Loomis, allow. That was pretty entertaining. And another entertaining scene with Dr. Loomis was when he confronts the crazy old preacher that knows what's going on. And the preacher kind of has a connection with him, and he brings out his booze, and he said, "You want a drink?" And I was like, he's not going to drink that. And he grabs his booze and turns it up. And then after he finishes drinking the booze, he kind of gets this weird smile on his face. It's the first time in the series that Dr. Loomis smiles. It's funny.
He was always fun hamming it up, even when I didn't like a lot of the sequels. He was always a fun element. But like I said, I don't remember any of the kills from this movie. They just completely have slipped from my brain.
Yeah, and
is that for a reason, Michael? Can you confirm this? Okay.
The thumb through the forehead was the only really memorable kill. It was one of the first
thumb through
kills.
the forehead.
He puts a thumb through this guy's forehead and just...
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And it's ridiculous how Michael Myers is literally everywhere. He can go from one side of town to the other, literally from one scene to the next, like he teleports. And the director at the time talked about how much he wanted this to seem like, okay, Michael Myers is a real person. He's just a real threatening person. There's nothing supernatural about him. then why do you have him magically appear from one scene to the next completely on the other side of town?
So no logic in the script then.
Yeah. And the kills weren't interesting. Even the setup to the kills weren't interesting. And there was nothing really interesting about it besides Jamie Lloyd, played by Daniel Harris, and Donald Pleasance.
Hamming it up.
Yeah, he's always good. But
He's always fun. Yeah.
But way too basic for me with the kills and the story, too. It was just kind of silly compared to the 2018 movie.
And the original.
Yeah.
Halloween Light.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it does have its fans. We're just not among them. But we do like Daniel Harris and Donald Pleasance.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll gouge your eyes out.
I watched this movie called Wounds. It is another 2019 horror film. This was it's a Hulu exclusive, and the synopsis is: disturbing and mysterious things to begin to happen to a bartender in New Orleans after he picks up a phone left behind at his bar. So this stars Armie Hammer in the lead role, who plays a bartender who picks up a phone, like it says in the synopsis, that was left at his bar. It has Zazie Beetz in it as well, the
Love
great
her.
Zazie Beetz, who's been everywhere for lately, from Joker to Deadpool, Atlanta, and Dakota Johnson, who I fucking loved. She was in this too.
Ooh.
So this isn't one of those movies where I think it's well directed. There's a lot of good atmosphere. It draws you into the story, and it's very ambiguous and mysterious as to what's going on in the movie. And it's Armie Hammer getting a little bit over in his head and discovering that he's kind of an awful person, which is kind of the point of the movie. At the same time, I felt like the script could have got to this a lot faster. There's a lot of good stuff going on, and I think the weakest thing about it is its script, because it strings you along for the ride for about halfway through, and after a while you're like, is this going anywhere? Is this going to like resolve itself? Which I don't mind. I love ambiguity in movies, but like I complained about last week with In the Tall Grass, this movie feels like it's leading you somewhere that it never arrives at, and it takes a little bit too long stringing you along to that point. So it ends in a way that's really inscrutable. So it's probably going to irritate and piss a lot of people off when they see it, because the ending is a little bit maddening. And at the same time, it's probably one of the most interesting things about the movie. So your mileage on this will vary. Armie Hammer's really good. Dakota Johnson's great. Zazie Beetz is really good. Good portent, good atmosphere. A lot of genuinely creepy stuff that goes on, where he gets a hold of a phone that some teenagers had left in his bar who should not have been there in the first place. And he starts getting texts from somebody who owns the phone. And then the texts become weirder and stranger, and they tell him to look at the videos on the phone. And the videos on the phone are very disturbing, of people being murdered in very gruesome ways. So he starts to feel like he's getting in over his head, and for a while it's a spine chiller until it's not. It's worth checking out as an exercise in horror, but it's one that could have used a better script. And again, I'm one of those people who I don't need the script necessarily to be the standout. As an example, a movie like The Shining or The Lighthouse have what I would imagine the scripts would read very vague, and the magic comes out through the filmmaking, through the experience itself. This has some of that, and it's well done, but it's not good enough to carry it all the way to the mark at the end.
Okay.
If you understand what I mean. Where I could see a lot of good stuff going on, but it just stays too long stuck in one place before arriving at its conclusion, which I actually found kind of interesting, but most people won't. It's a worthwhile movie to check out. It's not bad by any means, but goddamn, I feel like that script could have used a lot of touches, if you're gonna, like I said, ambiguity is fine, but if you're gonna string people along for so long and make them feel that there's gonna be a resolution to what's happening, you should try to deliver on that.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about it overall. I think I enjoyed it a little bit more. I enjoyed it more than I didn't, but it's definitely heavily flawed with some very strong elements at play.
One of those strong elements sounds like the cast, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. I like the setting of the movie because it takes place in the South. Forgot exactly which. I think it's New Orleans or somewhere around there. I think around New Orleans.
Okay.
And it gives you a good feeling of what it must be like there in terms of the atmosphere, the sweatiness, the thickness of the air, the bugs crawling around. So it does a good job with its setting and establishing a sense of realism as far as that goes. But it goes along too many blind alleys before arriving at an interesting but ultimately unsatisfying conclusion.
The next movie I watched for our Halloween week was Fear Incorporated from 2016. I had watched this before. I don't remember if I ever talked about it on the show, but I don't think I did. But it's one of the bad guys in it is a friend of ours. He's the producer on my film was Veronica Burgess. It's her husband Ronnie. So he was in it. He played a little Jack Nicholson type of character. Similar premise to The Game, where you hire this
The David
company.
Fincher film?
Yeah, where you hire this company to scare the shit out of you and follow you around and stalk you. It centers around this guy who's obsessed with horror, and this Fear Incorporated is an admittedly shady company, like in The Game, that follow you around and bring all your worst fears to life. And it stars Lucas Neff from Raising Hope. He was a star of Raising Hope, kind of a goofy guy. And it has a small appearance by Abigail Breslin that was pretty good. It's enjoyable. It's funny. It builds good suspense. The first half is pretty good. But then it kind of shits the bed toward the end, where it gets to the point where I'm kind of done with this. This company's stalking this guy and his group of friends, and he's kind of killing them off, but it's kind of weird. The comedy works for a while, the horror works for a while, but then both of them start falling flat a little bit. And then just when it starts going flat, where you're almost done with it, it's like a twist upon twist upon twist ending.
Does it come roaring back to life?
No.
Oh.
It kind of starts dying, and then that twist upon twist upon twist kind of puts the nail in the coffin and kind of kills it by the end. Really good first half, a lot of fun, a lot of good comedy, good horror, like I said, but everything good about it kind of fizzles out at the end, and it's not good anymore. But still, okay, it's a interesting watch.
It's similar to how my feelings are about the latest Terminator movie, Dark Fate, that I actually got to see.
Okay.
Were really good, really enjoyable. I wouldn't say it fizzles out at the end, but it loses a lot of its steam at the halfway mark and starts to lose more as it goes along towards the end, but still ultimately worth watching and a lot of fun.
Okay.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll stab your eardrums with an ice pick.
So the last movie I want to talk about, and I apologize because I feel like we've been talking about Rob Zombie forever on this podcast. I rewatched The Lords of Salem, which I had not seen in years. So the thing with The Lords of Salem, when I had seen it back in 2013, I went to the movies to go see it, and my initial impressions of it were that it was very well directed, but it showed a new side of Rob Zombie, but with the script that was severely lacking, in my opinion, and I kind of felt that the ending fell flat and it didn't work for me. What most surprised me about viewing it the second time is how well the whole thing worked for me, how well it's actually aged, and how much more artistic it is than I initially remembered it being. And I feel kind of bad because I feel like this movie got a lot of shit when it came out, and it still continues to get shit. And I think it's a case where it missed coming out, it just missed the horror renaissance era, where this movie came out right before the horror genre came roaring back to like crazy life as we've had with this decade with movies like It Follows and The Witch. Like all the great elevated horror films that we've seen come out seem to start off a trend, and it's made horror respectable in the mainstream, and the quality has gone up. So we've seen a lot of fantastic artistic horror films, and I think this movie was a little bit misunderstood at its time. If it would have came out a few years later, I think it would have had a lot more fans, because I could see so much talent on display. A lot of it reminded me of a Dario Argento film. It reminded me of Dario Argento. It reminded me of Rosemary's Baby. Definitely heavy Suspiria elements, but filtered through the lens of Rob Zombie. And while it's not my favorite Rob Zombie movie, that will probably always be The Devil's Rejects, it's the one with his most refined filmmaking, where it is just truly eerie. All the camera shots are perfectly chosen. The imagery is very bizarre and kind of hard to explain or put into words, but it's the type of cinema that I instinctively respond to.
Yeah.
I really respond to surrealism and putting you in a filmmaker who has the vision to put the audience in a very weird headspace. And the whole way through, I was absolutely magnetized so much that I had to watch it again and show it to one of my friends just to see if it wasn't just me. And man, I really feel bad for coming down on this film a long time ago. And I think as the years go by, it's going to be a lot more appreciated than it was when it came out. And it's kind of sad now looking back that a lot of people shit on it, because it was a different direction for Rob Zombie to go in. It's not like his other films, because most of his horror is more in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre mold, where it's a little bit more brutal, a little bit more in your face, funny and lively. It's not the Argento artsy type of elevated horror that we got in the 70s, and we seem to see more of it now. And I think if people had a better response to it, Rob Zombie might have made a different type of movie than 31. Looking back on it now, it seems like Rob Zombie was going back to the well of his style that he was known for, just the all-out brutality, and maybe he went a little bit too hard on it.
Yeah.
Because the response to Lords of Salem was not there. But fuck, I think it's a fantastic piece of horror cinema. The ending even works for me now, which is really bizarre. It's very unique in the way that it's filmed, and God, I can't get some of those images out of my head. Just the apartment itself that the main character lives in, Heidi LaRocque, played by Sherry Moon Zombie. She's a radio DJ, and she hosts a radio show that's dedicated to the macabre and the strange and the odd. And one day she gets a record sent to her from a band called the Lords. And the record comes in a mysterious wooden box that looks very old. And when she puts it on, it's very unpleasant sounding music that sounds truly satanic. It actually sounds like it's the sound of the devil you're hearing coming out of it, and it puts her in a bad mood, and it sends her whole week spinning and spiraling out of control. And ultimately, I found it to be a heartbreaking movie the second time I watched it, because Heidi is a very endearing character, and this is another reason why Sherry Moon Zombie, I feel, gets unfairly shit upon as an actress. She does a good job of selling herself as a middle-aged woman who's very sweet and endearing, but trying a little bit too hard to remain trendy and cool and relevant. And you get to see that her struggles, you get to see that she's a recovering drug addict. The record unleashes a lot of evil into her life that sends her crawling back to the bad habits that used to tear her down. And you see her slowly go from a very sweet, likable person to descending into just despair, and it's very sad by the end because it doesn't have a happy ending for Heidi, which I don't feel is really much of a spoiler, and it just has some of the best imagery of a horror movie to come out around that era. Really liked it watching it the second time. Excellent witch movie. I liked all the actresses who played the witches. They did a really good job. I like the sense of atmosphere in the movie. I like the feel. I like all the surrealistic sequences show a different side of Rob Zombie, and I would like to see him one day go back to trying another movie like this, because I feel like even though this type of film would be hated by a lot of horror fans, and I get that, I feel like now with the new wave of art house horror, there might be more appreciation for a Rob Zombie film that's done like that. So all in all, Lords of Salem is better than I remembered, and a fantastic piece of work from Rob Zombie, in my opinion. And all the things that didn't work about it the first time I saw it worked for me this time.
I have to watch that again, because I always remember thinking it was really well made and great atmosphere and great sense of dread and suspense. And then that ending just kind of killed the whole thing for me.
And now I had the same initial reaction where I was like, really? I think I actually said it on the podcast last year that the ending, you could tell what Rob Zombie's going for, and you get what he's trying to go for, but it ultimately doesn't land. And for me, this time, for some reason, it landed really well, and it left me feeling sad And it's another one of the interesting things about the movie. It has a very cool soundtrack. Aside from the weird music that Rob Zombie creates, that Heidi LaRocque plays, the really dreadful sounding music that sounds really satanic. The soundtrack in general is very bleak, very dreary, where I felt myself getting a little depressed by some of the music that was playing. It's kind of interesting because the movie goes back and forth between a very grounded reality that looks a little depressing and sad to these very colorful, surrealistic sequences that involve Satan. It has a really good balance between the fantastical and the realistic. A really good performance from Sherry Moon Zombie. Very enveloping, and I think in somewhere down the line it's going to be a horror classic. So I really like Lords of Salem, and I have to say I was wrong about my initial thoughts about that film.
Listen to this podcast, or I'll slice your fingers off.
Before I go over the last thing I watched, I just wanted to say something silly that I did. I attempted watching Haunt from 2019, another one everybody's talking about. And I watched a little bit of Hell House LLC. We ended up watching Fear Incorporated, Fear Inc., right? And the whole time people have been talking about Hell House LLC, I was thinking it was Fear Inc. So when the people that I was hanging out with wanted to watch Fear Inc., I put on Hell House LLC. And we got about 20-30 minutes in, and I realized, I haven't seen this before, this isn't it, and we realized it was Fear Inc. So I watched a little bit of that. It was really good, so now I'm finally going to watch Hell House LLC, and I'll report on that next week. So that was kind of something kind of stupid that I did. And another kind of stupid thing I did this week is I put in Haunt. It was supposed to be a really good one. I watched it all the way through and decided at the end of it that it wasn't that good. And then I remembered that I fell asleep several times during it because I put it on too late. So I will be reporting on that one next week too. But another thing that I did the same thing on, my final movie, was it was really late one night. I put it in. I wanted something dumb, fun, slasher. Right before I went to bed, my eyes were already shutting. And I put on Andy Palmer's The Funhouse Massacre from 2015. And within just a few minutes, my eyes popped open, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. It's not a perfect movie. I'm not telling everybody that this is the greatest movie ever. But for me, this is just my idea of the perfect, fun slasher movie. If you were a waitress in a restaurant and if you told me to order my ingredients of a great, perfect, fun slasher, it would be The Funhouse Massacre. It's about this strange woman in a black wig arrives at a maximum security lockup for the criminally insane. And this place houses particular killers such as a cannibal, a good-looking dentist, a taxidermist played by Clint Howard, and then a huge clown who is also an ex-wrestler, and then a suicide cult leader. Thrown into the mix of killers is also a clown girl who ends up being the daughter of the cult leader. So it's all these really stylized killers put into this local haunt. And it has a great appearance by Robert Englund. He has a really cool kill at the first of it. He's the warden of the facility for the criminally insane. Clint Howard, as I say, plays the taxidermist. Jerry Burns plays the cult leader, who played Kirk in Dear John back in '89. I'm not sure how many of you know of that, but that's how I know him. But he plays an awesome cult leader. Scotty Thompson is an actress that plays Sheriff Kate. She plays a badass sheriff. Courtney Gaines is Malachi from Children of the Corn. He makes a great little appearance. Sterling Suleiman. It was strange that I put on Funhouse Massacre with Sterling Suleiman because Sterling Suleiman played Bill in It the Musical. So we follow this badass female sheriff and this bumbling deputy, and come to find out the bumbling deputy is one of the writers. Ben Begley. He plays Deputy Doyle, and the girl that plays the final girl character, Renee Dorian, she came up with the story and the characters, and she played Lori, the final girl. We follow the main group of victims, which are employees at a restaurant that's near the attraction, and then we also follow the clueless workers in the funhouse that don't realize that they're putting together a real murder house. Animatronic gags are replaced with real people because the killers get into their little sections. Like the dentist gets into his dentist section, the taxidermist gets in his taxidermy section, and all their tools are too fake for them. So they're really annoyed with the tools. So right away they start grabbing some of the patrons that come to walk through. They start grabbing them and killing them right away. You see the people behind them in line to go through the attraction. They see the people ahead of them get killed, and they think it's part of the attraction, so they're taking selfies with the dead bodies and shit. So that shit was funny and entertaining. It starts this really cool thing with the editing where it builds up these major sequences where you see characters that you're familiar with facing off with these killers. It starts building up to the action. Right when the action starts, they cut to another character, and then you see what's going on with them, and then it cuts back to the action. They did that like 4 or 5 times. I thought it was really it made it feel more frenetic and entertaining. Third act comes, and there's decapitation after decapitation. It's just wild abandon, just insanity, just blood flying everywhere. Meanwhile, it's practical effects from the great Robert Kurtzman, who was the K from K&B Effects with Greg Nicotero. He's on his own here, and holy shit, all the kills were awesome. They were brutal.
I'll make a jack-o'-lantern out of your best friend's head.
They were in your face. They were very stylized and more colorful than they should be, while also being grounded in realism. So it made them that much more effective. At the end, it's so. Some people would think this was cheesy, but I was having a great time with it. There was a lot of showdowns at the end, like I told you, where the actors you're familiar with face off against these killers, and all the showdowns were awesome. Just a very involved story that's cheesy in all the right places. It's genuine in all the right places. It's called Funhouse Massacre, and it's just a fun house of horror. And I loved every minute of it. It's one of the best movies I watched this year.
What can we watch it on?
It is on, what was this on? This is on Amazon.
Amazon Prime?
It's free to watch on Amazon Prime, and
if you're in the U.S., we got to clarify that.
And you can also watch it on Tubi TV.
So we're pretty much out of time here. Just to keep everybody in the know, our horror variety show, Pickle's Horror Show, is going to be off the air for a few weeks. We'll make an announcement as to when it's going to come back, just so we can keep you updated, and it'll be airing again on Fridays. Yeah. In the meantime, just check out the American Horrors Roku channel. They'll be playing reruns throughout the weeks of our show, as well as a lot of interesting cult and exploitation horror movies.
Yeah, I'm sure even though we're taking off for a few weeks, they'll probably play the first few episodes of the first half of the season 2, and probably some of season 1. So
yes, so give the audience a good chance to catch up on that.
Yeah, and as always, check us out here at the Ghostman Rivera Horror Show podcast every Saturday.
Yes, check us out. So until next week, folks, happy horror.
Happy horror, everyone.